The Iranians over the weekend decided it would be a great idea to fling a missile at a U.S. consulate in Iraq. So there is actual video of this explosion in Erbil, Iraq, which is in Kurdistan, the Kurdish part of Iraq. Iran is openly firing missiles into this area, and they are targeting places where American consulates are. Here's a little bit of the video. Okay, so that is pretty frightening. According to the Associated Press, Iran claimed responsibility Sunday for a missile barrage that struck near a sprawling U.S. consulate complex in northern Iraq, saying it was retaliation for an Israeli strike in Syria that killed 2 members of its Revolutionary Guard earlier this week. So basically, Iran likes to lie that Mossad is all over the place and Mossad is in Iraq, and that's why they're attacking Iraq. So if only Iraq would join Iran in attacking Israel, then all of this would stop. Obviously, there's some pretty significant Shia versus Sunni interplay and violence in Iraq, not to mention the situation with the Kurds, where both the Iranians and the Iraqis are sort of fighting over Kurdistan and all the rest. But here's the point. The point, or the Kurdish areas of Iraq anyway, the point here is that Iran is ratcheting up the pressure at Russia's behest. That is what is happening here. It should strike no one as a coincidence that in the middle of these Iran nuclear negotiations, Iran is flinging missiles near the U.S. consulate complex in Erbil. The reason they are doing this is, once again, when America's enemies see mush, they push. And right now, Russia believes that the United States has an interest in using Russia as the intermediary in order to get this Iran nuclear deal done. John Kerry has made this absolutely clear. The envoy, Robert Malley, has made this absolutely clear. Joe Biden and his team have made this absolutely clear. They keep saying over and over and over again that they want to deal with Iran, and they don't care that Iran is a terror sponsor. They do not care that Iran threatens American allies ranging from Israel to Saudi Arabia to the UAE. They don't care about any of that. They want their deal. They want it on a piece of paper, and they want it tomorrow. And they don't care what the terms of that deal are. We've been playing you audio over the last week of the Russian mediator in that deal, who's basically right now, because the United States has a sanctions regime against the Iranians, whatever negotiations are happening in Vienna, basically you have the Russian emissary who's going back and forth between the United States and Iran. He's running hotel to hotel to convey particular offers. The Americans, in other words, are using the Russians, who they are fighting in Ukraine, in order to mediate with the Iranians. And so right now, the Russians are basically trying to press their advantage. The Russians are saying to the United States, we would like an Iran deal where you exempt our oil and natural gas from any sort of sanction, so we can sell to Iran and Iran will sell to the world, and then they will funnel the money back to us. And also, if you don't do that, then maybe Iran will just ratchet up the tension. I mean, after all, don't you want Iran under control? Don't you want Iran to stop all of this stuff? We can help you make Iran stop all of this stuff. All you have to do is cave. That's all you have to do. To pretend that Russia isn't a part of what we saw when Iran is firing missiles at U.S. consulates in Iraq is, of course, very silly, because right now, Russia is using Iran as a proxy, as they have been for quite a while right here. Iraq's foreign ministry on Sunday summoned Iran's ambassador to protest the attack, calling it a flagrant violation of the country's sovereignty. No injuries were reported in Sunday's attack in Erbil. It marked a significant escalation between the United States and Iran. Hostility between the longtime foes is often played out in Iraq, whose government is allied with both countries. The attack drew harsh condemnation from the Iraqi government, which called it a violation of international law and norms and demanded an explanation from Iranian leadership. The United States, for its part, condemned the strike, said it was an unjustified attack on a civilian residence. They said, we will support the government of Iraq in holding Iran accountable. We will support our partners throughout the Middle East in confronting similar threats from Iran. This is Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, said the United States of America stands behind the full sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Iraq. However, will that in any way undermine the negotiations that are currently happening with Iran? Of course not. Wendy Sherman of the State Department, she comes out and she says, listen, we know that Iran is bad. We know that Iran is pursuing terrorism. But before we deal with the fact that they are a terrorist regime that is the great spreader of violence in the region, we have to sign a deal with them. We just have to.
If Iran has a nuclear weapon, its ability to project power into the Middle East and to deter us, our allies and partners, is enormous. So President Biden believes very strongly, as does Secretary Blinken, as do I, that we need to make sure that Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. And then we also need to deal with their malign behavior in the region. But first, we've got to make sure that they cannot obtain a nuclear weapon.
Just to get this straight, what she's actually saying is, yes, they're a terrorist state. What if we give them a bunch of money and they'll promise us not to develop a nuke? Like these idiots. It's all part of this. It's the same regime. The same regime pursuing terrorism is the same regime developing a nuclear weapon. When you say, why don't we just give them a bunch of money? Do you really think that they are going to be honest? Has that been their history? That they've been super honest and open about this nuclear program, which they say is for civilian purposes? Why is it? Who has a stronger interest in the Middle East or anywhere on earth in Iran not having a nuclear weapon? The United States or, say, Israel, which is under nuclear threat from Iran, or Saudi Arabia, which is under nuclear threat? If all of those countries that are directly in the middle of that area, within the umbrella of the Iranian ballistic missile program, if all of them are saying this deal sucks, maybe you should listen to them. But this administration has no interest in listening to them. So what are the Russians doing? They know they have leverage points. So here are the leverage points that the Russians have now activated. The Russians have now activated the leverage point of the Iran negotiations, and they ratcheted it up by having Iran fire this missile at Erbil. Because, again, the idea here is that if the Iranians demonstrate that they are full rogue, then the Biden administration will say, well, man, we really need to make a deal with them to stop all this. We need to stop all this. Maybe we should just let the Russians have their oil and natural gas little exemption over here, and we'll get the deal done, and then we can proclaim the peace in our time, and it's all fine. So they're going to use the leverage point in the Middle East with regard to Iran, because they know that Biden is obsessed with this idea that if he inks a deal with the Iranians, then he gets to be part of the history books because he's a senile old dullard. Okay, so that's leverage point number one. Leverage point number two, the oil and natural gas in Western Europe. So the Russians are looking west, and they can see that Europe cannot indefinitely undergo the kinds of sacrifice that they are currently undergoing. They cannot continue to have energy be 100% more expensive than it was a month ago. And so they know there's going to be pressure on the Americans and on Zelensky to make a deal from that angle. Meanwhile, they're leveraging their own aggression with regard to Ukraine against the Americans. They're saying, listen, if you guys go any further, if you ship a single MiG in here, who knows? Who knows? We might nuke something. Who knows? We might just level a city. We might unleash a biological weapon. Who knows? So they're finding every leverage point they can because this is what Putin is good at. And Putin is a cancer, and he is finding every vulnerability that the West has, and he is using those vulnerabilities against the West. So the normal solution to that is that the West should be less vulnerable. That is the solution. So what would that mean? It would mean, one, opening up the production of oil and natural gas in the United States such that we have more oil and natural gas to export to Europe to alleviate their energy problems and alleviate our own. It would mean, two, making sure that we are not dissuaded by Vladimir Putin's empty threats and that we give the Ukrainians MiGs if they want MiGs. Doesn't have to be a no-fly zone. Doesn't mean we have to fly our planes in there to take down Russian jets. It does mean that we should be giving the Ukrainians more than is necessary in order to defend themselves if we wish them not to surrender all of these things, including future membership in the EU or NATO, over to the Russians and essentially align their foreign policy with Russia. Three, it would mean dropping this Iran deal and killing it outright and saying, listen, Iran obviously has ill intent. Iran is literally firing missiles at us while negotiating with us and using the Russians as a proxy. And the Russians, meanwhile, are attempting to exploit our own idiocy with regard to this Iran deal to evade the sanctions. It would mean doing all of those things. Are we going to do any of those things? Of course we're not going to do any of those things. We're going to continue to be weak. So why wouldn't Vladimir Putin continue to be strong? After all, he's so deep in this point. I don't know what people in the West think the end game is here for Putin. They really think he's just going to give up and go home? He's so deep in at this point. So they really think that Vladimir Putin, who is stationed around Kyiv right now and shelling Kyiv again, do they really think that he's just going to give up and say, all right, you know what? You win. I'm done now. Catch you later. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The most likely scenario, by the way, if Putin completely stalls out here, is he brings Belarus into the war from the north. They have a bunch of troops as well. Now, the United States is lying, right? The United States right now, they're saying, according to the Wall Street Journal, that they will not negotiate exemptions to the Ukraine-related sanctions on Russia in order to save that 2015 Iran nuclear deal and could try to strike a separate accord excluding Moscow. But that seems extraordinarily unlikely. I think that is very unlikely. I think the fact is the United States will do exactly what they did under Barack Obama, and the administration will basically say, we would never allow them to have cash. And then in the dead of night, you see the pallets of cash go in. So they would secretly sign some sort of deal that sort of quasi-excludes certain economic aspects of Russia's economy. Or an overall deal gets signed with Zelensky in Ukraine and Iran in Iran, and everybody is hunky-dory and Putin gets most of what he wants. A U.S. official said, I don't see the scope for going beyond what is within the confines of the JCPOA. I think it's pretty safe to say there is no room for making exemptions beyond those. The Iranian attack is likely to create more regional resistance to American efforts to strike a new nuclear containment deal with Iran. American, Iraqi, and other world leaders condemned Sunday's missile strike as a destabilizing act as the U.S. military stepped up its defenses and U.S. officials considered how to respond. But again, do I trust that the Biden administration will not cave on this? Why would I? I mean, seriously, why would I? And you know who else doesn't trust that the United States isn't going to cave on this? China. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.